Hi there, good afternoon and welcome to today's Kingston Library ebook review. I'm Fran and today the book I'm going to be lavishing with praise is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. This book is probably in my top 5 books I've ever read. It's one of my absolute favourite books, and it's a book that I've actually read several times in maybe the sort of the 10 years since I first read it. It genuinely is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, and the way that the author manages to convey the detail and the descriptions of the time and place where it's set, it transports you completely. And so if you want a holiday within a book, read this book. It is truly I don't think I've ever read another book that just transports you completely. Like I said, not even Harry Potter, I don't think, transports me to somewhere quite as much as this does. It's set in sort of the early 20th century, sort of the 20s, 30s, 40s in Japan, and it fits into a few of our categories. If you're doing the reading challenge, so if you are doing the challenge, it would fit into category 3. So if you've ever visited Japan, there are also sections of the book that are set in New York as well. So if you've ever visited New York, I suppose it could count. And also in 29, which is if you'd like to visit either Japan or New York, then it would fit into those. Although I think if you manage to read this book and then not want to visit Japan, I don't think you've read it properly. You need to read it again, because the descriptions and the dialogue and the way that he is able to put across the way of speaking and the way of describing things is just so beautiful that it's just entrancing. You can't tear your eyes away from the page, and as well as that, the story itself is so gripping. This book is available on Overdrive as an ebook, so that's how you can access it there. I'm lucky enough to have a physical copy because inside there are also some beautiful illustrations and things like that every now and then, and sort of the writing and things like that is just so beautiful. And so yes, the book sorry, I'm just staring at it because I love it so much. The story is based off of a real account of the author's conversations with a real geisha, and so while it's not complete plagiarism, it is drawn upon this real geisha's life, and how he manages to get some of the details right is based off of that. And that's sort of how a man named Arthur Golden, who was not alive in the 20s and 30s, is able to convey this. Yes, so the story of this book is about a young girl named Chio, who as a child is taken from her parents. Her parents actually sell her and her sister to an okiya in Kyoto. So they're taken from their small fishing village in Japan and taken to Kyoto, where they are each given to an okiya, which is a geisha house. The sister is taken somewhere else, and Chio is cruelly separated from her sister, and it's really heartbreaking so early on in the book, such a heartbreaking moment. And Chio is put into this okiya to train to eventually become a geisha. And as heartbroken as Chio is, she spends the years of her life growing up learning about geisha, and deciding that as far as she's fallen in her life and all that she's lost already, she tries to pull herself up to try and become something beautiful and become something important. Because in that time in Japan, geisha were the A-listers of the time. They're not sort of any film actors or anyone else were as famous as the geisha, or as prized because of their beauty and their mystery. And so she decides to become a geisha one day after being treated with kindness by a stranger. And this encounter is what drives her through the rest of her life. And we see that through her years as she grows up and she becomes a woman, and all the difficulty she has, and people trying to stop her from becoming a geisha because of her beauty. It truly you truly root for her. As she grows older and as she becomes a geisha, she is named Sayuri, which is her geisha name. And it's just all the trials and tribulations and all the details of geisha life that you never knew about. It's so interesting. It's just so interesting. Right, so I'll just give a short reading. This is just the beginning of the encounter which changes the whole course of Chio's life. So, why, it's too pretty a day to be so unhappy. Ordinarily, a man on the streets of Gion wouldn't notice a girl like me, particularly while I was making a fool of myself by crying. If he did notice me, he certainly wouldn't speak to me, unless it was to order me out of his way or some such thing. Yet not only had this man bothered to speak to me, he'd actually spoken kindly. He'd addressed me in a way that suggested I might be a young woman of standing, the daughter of a good friend perhaps. For a flicker of a moment I imagined a world completely different from the one I'd always known, a world in which I was treated with fairness and even kindness, a world in which fathers didn't sell their daughters. The noise and hubbub of so many people living their lives of purpose around me seemed to stop, or at least I ceased to be aware of it. And when I raised myself to look at the man who'd spoken, I had a feeling of leaving my misery behind me there on the stone wall. I'd be happy to try and describe him to you, but I can think of only one way to do it, by telling you about a certain tree that stood at the edge of the sea cliffs in Uroido. This tree was as smooth as driftwood because of the wind, and when I was a little girl of 4 or 5, I found a man's face on it one day. That is to say, I found a smooth patch as broad as a plate with 2 sharp bumps on the outside edge for cheekbones. They cast shadows suggesting eye sockets, and beneath the shadows rose a gentle bump of a nose. The whole face tipped a bit to one side, gazing at me quizzically. It looked to me like a man with as much certainty about his place in this world as a tree has. Something about it was so meditative. The man who addressed me there on the street had this same kind of broad, calm face. And what was more, his features were so smooth and serene. I had the feeling he'd go on standing there calmly until I wasn't unhappy any longer. He was probably about 45 years old, with grey hair combed straight back from his forehead, but I couldn't look at him for long. He seemed so elegant to me that I blushed and looked away. 2 younger men stood to one side of him, a geisha stood to the other. I heard the geisha say to him quietly, "Why, she's only a maid. Probably she stubbed her toe while running an errand. I'm sure someone will come along to help her soon." "I wish I had your faith in people, Izuko-san," said the man. "The show will be starting in only a moment. Really, Chairman, I don't think we should waste any more time." While running errands in Gion, I'd often heard men addressed by titles like Department Head, or occasionally Vice President, but only rarely had I heard the term Chairman. Usually the men addressed as Chairman had bald heads and frowns and swaggered down the street. This man before me was so different than the usual chairman that even though I was only a little girl with limited experience of the world, I knew his company couldn't be a terribly important one. A man with an important company wouldn't have stopped to talk to me. I could go on reading that for hours. It's genuinely the most beautiful prose ever. Genuinely, I could just continue reading that to you forever. So yes, that is our book for today, Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. Please read it. Yes, I heartily recommend that one, and I'd love to hear anyone's thoughts if anyone else has read it, or if anyone else would like to read it based off of this review. So yes, that is our review for today. Please join us later in the week. Thank you. Bye.